There are moments in history when silence is no longer an option. And today, we stand in one. A judge, cloaked in the robes of law, stripped Captain Ibrahim Traoré of his diplomatic protections, not with bullets, but with ink. A gesture so arrogant, so loaded with centuries of colonial shadow, that it forces us to ask who really holds power in this world, and who decides what justice means. It wasn't just a legal move. It was a message: bow, fall in line, or be erased. He did not break. Instead, he rose. And now, the world is watching. Captain Ibrahim's latest news has shaken the conscience of a continent. So, what does this mean for Burkina Faso? What does it mean for Africa, for the Black world? And more importantly, what does it mean for us? Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and stand with us for an Africa that will never bow again. Let us speak clearly, not in whispers or legal jargon, but in truth. When Judge Clarence Thomas signed the order to strip Captain Ibrahim Traoré of his diplomatic status, he did not merely sign a document. He struck at the heart of African dignity, and he did it from behind polished chambers, from the safety of his seat on the bench, far away from the red soil of Burkina Faso. With the stroke of a pen, he tried to erase what had been earned, not in courts, but in blood, in resistance, and in the long breath of a people rising. This was not a ruling. It was an insult soaked in arrogance, in fear, and in a deep misunderstanding of what true leadership means. Captain Ibrahim is not just a man. He is the living embodiment of Burkina Faso's defiance, a nation that has suffered under centuries of external manipulation, colonial greed, and broken promises. Yet from that suffering emerged a leader who speaks boldly, acts decisively, and refuses to bow. And that is what frightened Judge Thomas. He did not act from law. He acted from fear. Fear that an African nation could rise without begging. Fear that a leader could speak without permission. A fear that the cries of a continent long silenced were now echoing in the halls of power. This is not just about Burkina Faso's latest news. This is about every judge, every politician, every hand that signs away our dignity, assuming we will not speak back. But we do speak back. Because this is not 1885. This is not the Berlin Conference. This is not the age of divide and rule. This is a new era, and in this era, the gavel cannot silence the drumbeat of sovereignty. They thought they could humiliate Traoré. They thought a court decision would undo a revolution. But revolutions are not erased by rulings. Revolutions are written in the hearts of the people. Let us say it plain. Judge Clarence Thomas tried to turn Captain Ibrahim into an example, but he became the example. Instead, the example of what happens when power is divorced from principle. When robes cover fear. When a man forgets his oath. Because you cannot strip a man of what the people have already given him. Not with a document. Not with a decree. Not with a gavel. You cannot break a bond that was forged in sacrifice. You cannot erase legitimacy when it flows from the will of the people, not the approval of foreign powers. This was not justice. It was theater, and we saw through it. We saw the trembling hand behind the judgment. We saw the arrogance behind the robe. We saw the insecurity behind the law. And if you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. What happened to Captain Ibrahim was not a misstep. It was not a misjudgment. It was a betrayal, and not just of him, or of Burkina Faso, but of every black soul who ever believed in justice. Because when a judge in the world's most powerful nation uses his seat not to uplift the oppressed, but to strike them down, it reveals something much deeper than politics. It exposes a moral rot, one that has sat too long in silence, in complicity, in comfort. Clarence Thomas did not forget his oath. He abandoned it. He chose silence in the face of suffering. He chose arrogance over accountability. And when given a chance to do what was right, he sided with power, over and over again. We've seen this pattern. The courtroom, meant to be a place of justice, has too often been used to punish the bold, silence the righteous, and protect the rich. And yet, we are told to believe in the system, to trust the robes, to respect the gavel. But how can we respect a gavel that falls hardest on those who dare to speak? Burkina Faso has been here before, not in the courtroom, but in the court of colonizers, where kings and chiefs were summoned, stripped of their status, their land, their dignity. And what was the justification then? Order, law, civilization. To strip a leader of status is not simply a legal act. It's psychological warfare. It's humiliation dressed up in paperwork. It's a reminder that the empire still believes it owns the narrative. But that narrative is cracking. The world is watching. And what they see is not justice. They see a powerful man weaponizing the law to put a rebellious nation back in its place. That is the betrayal. The betrayal of principle. The betrayal of black unity. The betrayal of our collective memory. Because Clarence Thomas, a black man, stood on the side of oppression, and in doing so, he dishonored every ancestor who ever stood against chains. Let us not pretend this was neutral. Let us not pretend this was fair. It was calculated. It was intentional. It was a warning. A warning to every African leader who dares to rise, to every voice that refuses to be domesticated, to every people who say, "We are enough." Because Captain Ibrahim's latest news is not of a man who fled in fear, but of a man who stood tall, stood firm, and refused to kneel. He didn't fold. He didn't flinch. And that is what they cannot understand. They cannot understand how a leader, without the West's approval, can still stand in power. They cannot understand how a nation, robbed for centuries, can still sing with pride. They cannot understand how the truth still rises even after every attempt to bury it. But we understand. We understand that the robes do not make the judge. The title does not make the leader. And law, without justice, is just performance. So when Clarence Thomas struck down Captain Ibrahim, he struck at a mirror. And in that mirror, he did not see law. He saw fear. Because real power does not fear the truth. Only fragile power does. You cannot break what was forged in fire. And Burkina Faso has lived through fire for generations. Colonial invasions, resource theft, puppet regimes. They tried everything to silence its soul, and yet it sings. So when Clarence Thomas believed he could diminish that spirit with a decree, he revealed how little he understands African strength. Let us be clear. A piece of paper cannot undo the bond between a leader and his people. A courtroom cannot erase a movement rooted in love, dignity, and sacrifice. And a robe, no matter how black, no matter how American, cannot cover up cowardice. This is why Captain Ibrahim remains undeterred. When they stripped his diplomatic status, they thought they stripped his power. But what they forgot is true power doesn't come from titles. It comes from truth. And truth does not tremble at gavels. It stands. It breathes. It roars through the mouths of grandmothers selling tomatoes in Ouagadougou, through the fists of students marching for Pan-African unity, through the tears of veterans who bled for independence, only to see it sold. They say diplomatic status is what protects a man. No. Dignity is what protects a man. And Captain Ibrahim still walks with dignity, not because it was given, but because it cannot be taken. Let us not forget this moment is bigger than him. This is about every African leader who ever said, "No more handouts. No more interference. No more colonizers in modern clothes." Because this isn't just about politics. It's about principle. It's about sovereignty that cannot be negotiated. It's about dignity that cannot be outsourced. It's about justice that doesn't need Western validation to be real. Do you hear the sound? It is the sound of Africa rising. And it's not the sound of drums alone. It's the sound of defiance, of pride, of a people who have remembered their power. Captain Ibrahim is not just a man. He is a message. A message that says, you cannot erase what you did not create. And that message is spreading. From Accra to Johannesburg. From Harlem to Port-au-Prince. From every street where black souls breathe and still believe in a new Africa. Believe in an Africa that will no longer be summoned to courtrooms by foreign judges. Believe in an Africa whose leaders answer to their people, not their puppeteers. So let them strip titles. Let them issue decrees. Let them try to humiliate. They will fail because they are not facing just a man. They are facing a movement. And that movement is not just rising, it is already here. What Clarence Thomas did was not an isolated insult. It was a message to the entire global South, to every nation once colonized, and to every leader who dares to act without asking permission. It said, "You are only legitimate when we say so." When they stripped his status, they tried to strip a continent of its dignity. But history will record something different. It will record that when the system overreached, Africa roared back, because injustice anywhere is a warning everywhere. What they do to one leader today, they will try to do to all who resist tomorrow. And this warning is not just for Africa. This is for Detroit, for Baltimore, for Kingston, for London's Windrush warriors, for Brazil's favelas, for every community where blackness is criminalized and leadership is punished. What happened to Captain Ibrahim is what happens to all who refuse the chain's punishment. Smear, erasure, but he stood. And, by standing, he reminded us that our strength is not in diplomacy, it's in destiny. They call it rule of law. But when the law serves only the powerful, it becomes rule by fear. And fear, real fear, is what made Clarence Thomas act, not legal wisdom, not constitutional clarity, but fear. Fear that an African leader could rise without Western strings. Fear that Africa's youth would rally behind a man who sounds like them, fights for them, dreams with them. Fear that sovereignty could become more than just a slogan. And so, in fear, he struck. But what happens when you strike a mountain? You don't destroy it. You reveal your weakness. And Clarence Thomas has revealed himself not as a giant, but as a gatekeeper of fading power, not as a protector of justice, but as a pawn for privilege. And while he tried to bury Captain Ibrahim beneath paperwork and public humiliation, something else happened. The world looked up, and they saw a leader still standing, still speaking, still leading. Burkina Faso did not collapse. It ignited. That's the lesson. And that's the message we must carry across oceans and borders. If you feel this truth, say it in the comments. Africa can do it. We are. The injustice of one courtroom cannot silence centuries of resistance. It cannot suppress a continent ready to chart its own course. And it cannot destroy a leader chosen by the people, protected by truth, and carried by history. This is not about victimhood. It is about victory. Victory for every child who sees that leadership can come from the soil of Africa. Victory for every elder who lived through colonial lies and now sees the truth walking tall. Victory for every soul who doubted if our time would come. Captain Ibrahim. Latest news is no longer about a courtroom. It is about a continent answering back. It is about a people rising up. It is about you. Wherever you are refusing to bow again. Let the world remember this moment. Not for the arrogance of Clarence Thomas, not for the betrayal of justice, but for the resistance that rose from Burkina Faso to every corner of the black world. When a judge tried to strip Captain Ibrahim of his diplomatic status, he didn't just attack a man, he attacked an idea that Africa could lead itself, that black power could exist without permission. But what he forgot is this: you cannot strip what you did not give. Diplomatic status. That's paperwork. Respect. That's earned. Legitimacy. That's sacred, and it comes from the people. Captain Ibrahim stands not because a court allows it, but because a continent demands it, and in this fight, he revealed something they never expected: that Africa is watching, that Africa is speaking, that Africa is rising. The robe of Clarence Thomas cannot cover the truth. His gavel cannot silence the voice of a sovereign people. His fear cannot stop the future. Burkina Faso latest news is no longer about a courtroom. It's a global call for justice, a warning to the corrupt, and a promise to the next generation. This isn't just about Captain Ibrahim. It's about you. It's about every elder who remembers the chains, every youth who dreams beyond borders, every voice that ever whispered, maybe, just maybe, we were born for more. We are. And to those watching from Harlem to Lagos, from Accra to Oakland, like, share, speak. Subscribe because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear.